Hi guys, welcome back to Apocalypse. I know it's been a long time since I've posted a video, about 19 months, but I haven't gone anywhere. I've just been doing a lot of research. Really, what I've been doing is building on the work of others that have come before and come up with my own hypothesis on the placement of ancient sites around the world. I've developed an Earth grid based on a system of radians and 56ths. You can see this encoded into sites like Giza and Stonehenge, and possibly even Borobudur. For me, this all started when I looked into the work of Howard Crowhurst and the Heath brothers. All three note that certain ancient sites around the world are placed at sevenths between the equator and the North Pole. Prior to these researchers came the work of John Michell, who noted that Avebury was placed at precisely 4/7 between the equator and the North Pole. So much so that the line of latitude runs straight through the centre of the world's largest stone circle. Prior to Michell came the work of Livio Stecchini. It wasn't long before Michell, maybe a decade before, but Stecchini noted that there were sites at sevenths between the equator and the North Pole. He also makes note of sites that are located at half intervals of sevenths between the equator and the North Pole. If you read Hugh Newman's book Earth Grids, you'll see that even in the 1300s, people were aware of this system. North African historian Ibn Khaldun, for example, back in the 1300s, makes note that the world, or the ancient world, is divided into 7 latitudes. So, what's going on here? Well, firstly, let's bring up my Earth grid. Let's take away everything that's not related to latitude just for the moment, and let's see what's going on north to south. Here we can see that there are sites located at sevenths, but just as Stecchini said, there are places located at half intervals. If we extrapolate this relationship to encompass the whole circumference of the world, you'll see that this is actually a division of 56. So it's 14 from the equator to the North Pole, and then it's 14 from the equator to the South Pole. Because this is a 2D projected map, it doesn't show the world as a globe. We have to remember the world is a sphere, so this system carries on the other side of the planet. So a full rotation is 14 plus 14 plus 14 plus 14, which is 56. So why 56? Well, let's look at certain ancient sites before we delve into that. It's been noted by various researchers over the decades. As far as I'm aware, the first person to note this was probably Flinders Petrie, where it has been suggested that the Great Pyramid at Giza is a 1 to 43,200 scale replica of the Northern Hemisphere. If we analyse the measurements of the Great Pyramid, you'll notice that the circumference is 1,760 Royal Egyptian cubits. So why is this important? Well, firstly, it's a multiple of 22. And from what I can observe and what others have observed is that in the ancient world, and probably even in prehistory, people were able to use 22/7 for an approximation of pi. If you multiply 22 by 8, you get 176. I'm just going to knock the 0 off the end. I think the 0 there is mainly for scale. So if you didn't multiply 176 by 10, the Great Pyramid would be tiny. It really wouldn't stand out at all. So if you multiply 22 by 8, you get 176, which is an analogue to the circumference of the pyramid. And if we go a step further, we could say that perhaps you'd want to model the world as being a circumference that's divided into 176 equal steps. So this begs the question, why don't we analyse the circle in terms of 22 instead of 176? I think perhaps that ancient geodesists were interested in the quarter circle as it related to the arc distance between the equator and either pole. If we consider that the circumference of a circle is exactly 2 pi radians, or 44/7, 176 happens to be the lowest multiple of 22 that yields an integer when first divided by 2 pi. Then further divided by 4 so as to relate it to the quarter circle. So if you look at something like the 360-degree system that we use today, it's not very good for looking at things in terms of radians because 1 radian is not an integer value in degrees. Whereas if you divide 176 into radians, you get precise integer values. So why is this important? Well, if we look into the work of Crowhurst and the Heaths yet again, they all suggest that people in prehistory were incapable of using irrational numbers. so it was likely they had to use number systems that would yield integer values. So how does this relate to 56? Well, 56 in this case is the multiplier. So if you multiply 56 by 22/7, which is the ancient value for pi, then you get 176. This is the fraction used to create this number system. And it's from this that we can see that there are places around the world located at 56ths away from each other. Now if we update the map to show sites located east to west, or longitudinally, we can see there are also sites placed at 56ths east to west. Admittedly, it doesn't have the same consistency as the north to south placements, but that's all to do with surveying and geodesy. It's very easy to measure latitude. You can do this on a daily basis. You can even do it with simple tools like spears and a very simple compensation tool. The easiest time to measure your latitude is at the equinoxes during culmination or high noon. The angle cast by the shadow at high noon, using any stick or gnomon, is precisely equal to your latitude. As far as I'm aware, the only way to measure longitude in prehistory would have been to make observations of the moon. You'll have to understand its inclination and the fact that it has a precession of 18.6 years. So I don't mean the actual moon's axis being precessional, I mean its orbital axis being precessional. So the way that the moon travels related to the fixed stars, it wobbles, or rather its orbit wobbles over an 18.6 year period. And it very much seems that there are various ancient sites around the world that have been set up to measure this phenomenon. I will make a very short video about this separately to this one in the near future. Because it's difficult to measure longitude using the moon, it looks like various anchor points have been placed at 1 radian intervals to each other. This reduces the need to actually rely upon the moon as your longitudinal tool. I suspect that land surveys were performed in prehistory to locate these ancient sites, or rather to determine their placement. So your land survey would have been referenced to one of the 5 major meridians. The primary meridian is located between Lake Manicouagan in Canada and Tiwanaku in Bolivia. The next major meridian or secondary meridian is located at the Richat Structure, which is precisely 1 radian to the east. These are both natural features. Well, I mean the Richat Structure and Lake Manicouagan. Tiwanaku obviously is a man-made structure, but it is placed next to another natural structure, which is Lake Titicaca. 1 radian to the east of the Richat Structure lies the Ziggurat of Ur. This seems to be the next major meridian marker, or what I'm calling the tertiary meridian. This isn't as precise as the previous alignment, and that's why I think this system of anchor points has been used. And you hear the term anchor point used by Graham Hancock and Livius Tacchini beforehand, where it's likely that certain sites are more important than others as far as being used as a geodetic reference. So as I said before, the land surveys were likely done relative to one of these 5 meridians. Obviously, using very simple tools to measure longitude using the moon is going to yield slightly different levels of accuracy depending on the techniques and length of observations made. And this is why I think these anchor points are being used. So you get inaccuracies between the major meridians, but the longitudes calculated from these major meridians are far more accurate, as you'll see later. So the 4th or quaternary major meridian is located at the Angkor complex in Cambodia, specifically at Ak Yum. Ak Yum predates everything else there. It predates the complex, although I should say it has been developed over time. It's interesting to me that Ak Yum lies on the banks of the largest hand-cut reservoir in history. So this is a theme you'll see on this Earth grid, is that most of the major references are based on natural geological features. And where there aren't natural geological features, these are reflected in the man-made structures. So Titicaca is the largest lake in South America. Lake Manicouagan, as far as I'm aware, is the largest ring-shaped structure on the planet. The Richat Structure is probably the 2nd largest ring-shaped structure on the planet, and nature has kindly placed it exactly 1 radian to the east of Manicouagan. There doesn't seem to be any natural lake or geographical feature that marks out the tertiary meridian, although saying that, there used to be a gigantic lake in the Rub al Khali Desert, which happens to be on this same meridian. I believe it dried up around 5,000 years ago. And the Angkor complex shares the same longitude as the largest lake in Southeast Asia, just a little way south of the Angkor complex itself. The quinary, or fifth major meridian, does not lie at 1 radian intervals from the previous ones, and this is due to the fact that the eastern coast of Australia is within a 1 radian distance of the previous marker. But what you can see is they've taken the radian as derived from 44/7 and subtracted precisely 30 degrees from it and used the monument of Uluru as their marker for this system. Okay, so we spoke about Giza. Another place that reflects these numbers again is Stonehenge. So if we take a look at Stonehenge, as we see it today, this really is a Bronze Age construction. What we would recognise as phase 1 of Stonehenge was built by a different people during the Neolithic, and the earth banks that you see there today were built during this time, but the stonework wasn't there. There were only 56 posts, equally spaced. Again, we see this number 56. So why is this important? Well, if you measure the inner circumference of the innermost earth bank, you'll see that it's 560 Royal Egyptian cubits. Again, I would suggest that we knock the 0 off because the 0 is simply there for scale. And given that there are only 56 posts, I would say there's even more evidence to suggest that the 0 is simply there for scale. And again, if we decide just to multiply by 22/7 or pi, then we get the number 176. Interestingly, if we multiply 56 by 45/7, we get 360. So it's making me start to wonder, maybe the 360-degree system is actually derived from the 56 multiplier. I need to do more research on this really to see if there's any more evidence than this, but in the meantime it's something to dwell on. Okay, so not only do we see this number system reflected between Stonehenge and Giza, it turns out that both sites are geodetically linked to one another. I can't remember if I mentioned my zenith node hypothesis on previous episodes, but basically I'm working on the idea that ancient ley lines and alignments are set up using zenith nodes. So a zenith node is any site within the tropics. Why within the tropics? Well, because the tropics are the only place where you can get a zenith measurement of the sun. And what do I mean by zenith? Well, it's simply when the sun is directly overhead. And why is this important? Well, you can actually use it to calculate your distance from the zenith node by making a simple observation similar to the latitude observation. And this was actually done more than 2,000 years ago by Eratosthenes. He used the zenith technique to measure the size of the world. But instead of measuring the size of the world, we're using this to create ancient alignments. There is a well-known alignment between Stonehenge, Avebury, and the Ring of Brodgar, north of Scotland. Why is this important? Well, you've got Avebury, which is the largest stone circle in Britain and the world, and the Ring of Brodgar is the 3rd largest stone circle in Britain. If we put this into perspective, there are over 1,300 stone circles in Britain. Working on my zenith node hypothesis, there must be a node located within the tropics to set up this alignment. If we extend the alignment, we'll find in the country of Benin in West Africa a zenith node that is precisely placed to create this alignment. This is the Python's Temple in Ouidah, Benin. The Python's Temple is the most important temple to the modern Vodun religion, and although Vodun is a relatively new religion, it has roots based maybe 6,000 to 8,000 years in the past. The followers of Vodun also have various sacred shrines located all throughout West Africa. The most important or most sacred shrine is the Dankoli Shrine, and you'll see that the Dankoli Shrine and Python's Temple are set up to create an alignment between Avebury, Stonehenge, and the Ring of Brodgar. And even more interestingly, Python's Temple is located 156th north of the equator. And this is something you'll see happening over and over again. You see these sites being placed in very specific places. It happens so much so that you can't say it's a coincidence. I do understand that you can create as many alignments as you want if you use random sites, but if we're talking about the largest sites and the most important sites and the most sacred sites, it has now gone beyond a statistical coincidence. The axis of the alignment can be explained by the shadow observed at Avebury during a zenith alignment. So when the sun is directly overhead at the Python's Temple, you'll see a 45-degree shadow cast at Avebury. So if you stick a gnomon into the ground, the length of the gnomon will be equal to the length of the shadow. It's a 1-to-1, and that indicates that Python's Temple is precisely 45 degrees away from Avebury Stone Circle. So how is Stonehenge geodetically linked to Giza? Well, Giza shares a zenith node with Stonehenge, and it happens to be the Python's temple. So Python's temple is located 36 degrees away from Giza. There's also another alignment that might suggest that both sites are related. So there's something called an ordinal alignment. So I will go over this in future episodes, but most of the really important sites that I've located have at least one or more ordinal alignments. So ordinal is just 45 degrees offset from cardinal. So cardinal is north, south, east, and west. So ordinal is just a 45-degree interval offset from any of the cardinal directions. You'll see that Giza has a very precise ordinal alignment with Serpent Mound. Again, we're seeing this serpent symbology. Python's temple, Serpent Mound. And why do I think Stonehenge may be related? Well, Stonehenge is 56 degrees away from Python's temple. It's that 56 number we're seeing yet again. And again, this is another clue to suggest to me that perhaps the 45/7 multiple of 56 is the key to the origins of the 360-degree circle system. And if this 56-degree arc distance isn't enough evidence for you, this alignment is set up via Stanton Drew, which is the second largest stone circle in Britain. Just very briefly, I want to touch upon Borobudur. And why Borobudur? Well, it's 156th east of Akyum at the Angkor complex, which is the tertiary meridian. I believe this alignment was placed so precisely by a land survey rather than using the moon. And this is because when we look at this region of the world, during the Ice Age, we could say it was actually one landmass called Sunderland, where these islands were physically connected to one another and you could walk from one place to another. So you would have been able to walk from Akyum to Borobudur. And if we zoom in on Borobudur, we can see that it's just 160 meters offset from the 56th relationship. This is a very high level of precision, and this is something you see repeated over and over again. There are other sites that are located precisely on this 56th grid, and when I say precisely, the lines go straight through the center of these sites. I appreciate that this isn't a proper survey, but using Google Earth, if we measure the center circle at Borobudur, we get a circumference of 56 yards. When we measure the outer circle at Borobudur, we get roughly 176 yards. I appreciate that these aren't perfect circles. The runout isn't great from an engineering perspective, but it does add evidence that this is part of the 56th system. Now, if we look at the red lines on the world grid, you'll see that there's intervals of 18 degrees, which are 20ths of the Earth's circumference. You might be asking, how does this relate to radians? So if we analyze the Earth's circumference purely in radians, where we can say that it's 2 pi radians that make up the Earth's circumference, these intervals become pi over 10, or 22 over 70. Why are they using this system instead of the 56th system? Well, I would suggest really the Atlantic is such a wide space that it would make sense to use a lower resolution. There's no point dividing it into 56ths. And with regards to North Africa and Europe and the ancient Near East, I would suggest that this system is used here because of the natural markers that are in place. It's much easier to use these 20ths or pi over 10 because that is the natural topography of that part of the world. Okay, I don't want to go into too much in this episode. This is really a stepping stone to what's to come in the near future. Obviously, there'll be people out there saying, oh, how could these sites be related? They're built by vastly different people at vastly different times. Some of these monuments are fairly modern. I mean, you're talking 800 years old, and others are going back to the Neolithic, maybe 5,000 or more years. So how can they be related? Well, I would suggest that the dates given by archaeologists are largely correct, but these sites are likely built over much older monuments. So I think they're simple monuments. I think there was a mound building culture. This has been suggested by other people, not only myself. This is something that goes back way before I even started getting into this subject, but I think there was a mound building culture, and I think certain sites get renovated over time. Whether or not people understand the true meaning or origins behind this, I don't know. Did the builders of Borobudur understand its placement? I would say probably yes, given that some of the symbology that's built into the site. I mean, it would suggest that there are people that understand what's going on and they're keeping this knowledge secret. I think there is evidence of that. I think there are modern buildings and modern monuments that have been built in the last 20 and 30 years that would suggest that these relationships are well known. I will delve into that rabbit hole in another episode, and I promise you it's much saner than it sounds. But for now, I would suggest that perhaps the people that built these mounds in the distant past, or maybe it wasn't us. And the reason I say this is because there are a couple of sites that were known to be used by the Denisovans that lie on this grid. So Denisova Cave is precisely located on the grid with extreme accuracy. And Cobra Cave, although it's not located precisely on the Ak-Yum meridian, it's actually a more precise placement of the radian system than Ak-Yum itself. So why the Denisovans? So if you look into the work of Andrew Collins, he's written an article not too long ago where he shows that two genes inherited by modern humans are strongly associated with autism, and these genes came from the Denisovans. There hasn't been enough fossil evidence to confirm this, but from protein and DNA analysis, it looks like the skulls of Denisovans were much larger than modern humans. So is it possible there was a savant race of hominin in the ancient past that was able to surpass us? Well, technologically, they were ahead of us at the time. They seemed to develop drill technology before we did. I mean, probably something akin to a bow drill or pump drill. So it would be relatively simple in today's terms, but at the time, they were tens of thousands of years ahead of our own species. The Aboriginals of Australia and the Aboriginal people of Japan, when they arrived in their modern-day homelands, they arrived with ground stone tools. So ground stones in the rest of the world are really associated with the Neolithic. And we know that the people of Japan, or the Aboriginal people of Japan and the Aboriginal Australians, they carry a not insignificant proportion of Denisovan DNA. Did they inherit other ideas? I don't know. This is highly speculative, but it's something I want to look into. Now, the other interesting thing is that so many of the world's cosmologies and creation stories talk of the gods who live above the clouds or in the mountains. Is it possible that these gods are the Denisovans? The people of Tibet have inherited a Denisovan gene that allows them to survive and thrive at high altitudes, while the rest of us would struggle. When we look at the placement of Denisovan sites around the world, they're either located in mountains or very, very close to the mountains. So it's something that needs to be explored and taken seriously. Okay, like I said before, I've done a lot of research over the last couple of years. There's not a lot more I want to do for now. I want to start getting these ideas out. So for now, I think I'm going to call it a day, and I'll see you in the next episode.